Welcome to this edition of Inside the Game. It's such a pleasure to always be joined by living legends, and that's what we try to do on this show. And today, we're getting the greatest living legend of all time when it comes to hockey broadcasting, the legendary Doc Emrick. Doc, so nice to visit with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Pierre. It's great to have the invitation. It's nice to be with you. And I remember Foster Hewitt, before the Henderson goal, he referred to Cornwallis as making a wild stab at it. That sort of describes my career in broadcasting.
One of the great parts about hockey, Doc, are all the legendary nicknames. Boom Boom Geoffrion with the Montreal Canadiens, Rocket Richard with the Montreal Canadiens, the great one in Wayne Gretzky, Le Magnifique and Mario Lemieux, Sid the Kid in Pittsburgh, Sidney Crosby. How did Michael Doc Emrick get the nickname Doc?
Well, it wasn't terribly creative. There was a man running the team in Portland, Maine named Ed Anderson, and shortly after I got my doctorate at Bowling Green, we did a PR release about that, and so he started calling me that, and it spread around the American League, and then eventually into Philadelphia when I went there. So it's not very creative, and that was the start of it, probably in 1976, and so that would be 50 years of the nickname. Around the house here, Joyce calls me Mike, and the dog doesn't say a whole lot about what my nickname is, but it's nice of you to say that, Pierre.
Well, it's always something that fascinated me, and I knew about your doctorate from the legendary Bowling Green, where Jerry York and Ronnie Mason before and built an unbelievable hockey program. And Doc, it looks like old BG might be back on the track when it comes to hockey.
Starting to fly a little bit now, aren't they? Yeah,
They
it's
are.
been rebuilt. It's starting to get some credibility in winning games, and the bandwagon is very large, and it's large enough for even a guy that's 5'6" to fit on it. I'm told.
Where does this hockey passion for Mike Doc Emrick come from?
From having seen my first game in Fort Wayne and marveled at how collision a sport it was. I could see guys skate fast and all of that, and the skating that I saw wasn't nearly as fast as what I see today. But back then it seemed fast enough. But I think the passion that the guys played with, they were probably making $3,000 a year in 1960. But they played hard, they collided, and they fought. And that first game I saw went into overtime, and with 2 seconds left in overtime, the player coach from Muskegon fought the tough guy from Fort Wayne. And I thought, well, that's showing proper attitude, isn't it? And the game ended in a tie. But that was probably a fight for the next time the two of them met more than anything else. But I was hooked. I wanted to be a baseball announcer until that night in 1960. And I was able to see some games on television thanks to the 1960 U.S. Olympic team. The first time that the Olympics were ever televised in the United States was 1960 because they were in California, in a place now renamed, but then known as Squaw Valley. And it was convenient, I guess, to get TV cameras into the U.S. and out in California to televise it. And of course, the U.S. team ran the table and beat everybody, and they weren't forecast to. In some cases, they were supposed to finish last, but they won everything. And so out of that, CBS started to televise some NHL games on Saturday afternoon. So I started to see some games, pestered my folks to take me to a game in Fort Wayne. And when I saw it live, that was it. I was hooked.
I got to ask you, you talk about Fort Wayne like it was yesterday, and it probably was in your mind because I know your mind's like a steel trap. One of the mentors I think you had over the course of your career was Bob Chase, the legendary play-by-play man of the Fort Wayne Comets. Is that a fair thing to say, Doc? Was he a mentor for you?
Oh, yes. And he was undoubtedly a mentor for a lot of people like myself. But Bob arrived there in 1952. The team had been there for 1 year, and he was there doing games until he was 90. and he passed away, I believe, at 91. They still have a Bob Chase night on the night before American Thanksgiving, and his daughter comes back from Colorado and is there for the festivities. It was always a special night on Thanksgiving night because Bob would, before he signed off, he would always give a little Thanksgiving homily, as it were, before he signed off on the radio that night. And I remember we would go on Thanksgiving Eve and then Christmas night. We would go to Comets games because my parents were teachers. There was no school the next day in both cases. And so we would all go to the hockey game in Fort Wayne. And we would be listening on the radio to the wrap up of the broadcast on our way home. And we would always recall Bob would say something kind of special and, I guess by definition, spiritual on those nights that were special holiday nights. So he was remembered for those particular nights, and his daughter does come back for Thanksgiving Eve.
Before you had the chance to go ride on all those fancy planes, you rode on a lot of buses. And one of the things that always endeared you to me was the way you were a man of the people, especially when we did games like in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And I saw your relationship with the fans, and I saw your relationship with the Hansons. And I was blown away by how tight you were with those people. Where did that come from, Doc?
Oh, I don't know. I like being around people that like the sport, and it didn't matter who they were. And one of the things that came out of that night, Pierre, was I was in the hallway, and Steve Carlson came out of their dressing room and said, "Would you come in and take a picture with us?" And I'm thinking they want me to do a picture with them. So I did, and I saved it, and it's one of my most treasured things to have a picture. And we did the gladiator pose, and then we did the fight pose where they were beating me up. It was a great thrill for me. And the event, of course, was that night. And they showed me the penalty box in Johnstown that was very small, and they explained, and you may have seen these nights yourself, Pierre, in various places, that when they had so many fights and the penalty box was so small that the players that spilled over the penalty box would sit in the aisles next to the fans until their time was up. I can imagine what that must have been like.
Me too. I can imagine. I did have a couple games that I coached in the minors that were like that, no question. One of them was actually in Johnstown. I coached against the living legend that is Nick Fatiu when he was the coach of the Johnstown Jets. And believe it or not, Doc, after that game, I told my players we were on a long road trip that actually had started in Toledo and eventually ended up in Dayton. But we had a little pit stop in Johnstown and then down to Wheeling. And I told my players, if we win this game, I'm going to take you guys out over to what used to be in the movie, the Aces, the bar. And I took my players in there. And I'll never forget the owner saying to me, "You're the first team that's been in here like 5 years," because none of the teams wanted to stay. Have you ever had a chance to go into that establishment, Doc, across the street
Well,
from the
you
ring?
must have had plenty of courageous players to do that.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Doc, one of the beautiful things about hockey, and I learned this from you, you get to celebrate so many people. One of the things that I really liked was when I was working in the minor leagues in particular, you meet so many different people and so many characters. You were in Maine for a long time before you got your big break, obviously, to go up to be in Philadelphia. Any great characters that you ran into over the course of your time in Maine?
Oh, yes, but not all of them were involved in hockey. There was one named Gary Merrill. He was he was an actor who was married to Betty Davis,
Wow.
and he would occasionally come into the office to meet up with our president Ed Anderson, and they would go out and play golf. And Gary was, as I said, he was an actor and he was a character, and he would come into the office wearing a skirt, and he would play on the golf course. He would go to the golf course wearing a skirt because he wanted to be cool. It was usually in July in Maine. It was plenty hot. He wanted to be comfortable. But I remember he was known to me because he narrated a series that I watched during my high school years called The Valiant Years. It documented the history of Winston Churchill during World War II, and he was the narrator. He had a wonderful voice, but I never thought I'd get a chance to meet him. But he hung around the Maine Mariners. He did some acting commercials when the Mariners first came to town. He wore an old sea captain's hat and did some TV for us to get people familiar with what the Mariners were going to be like. Of course, had nothing to do with hockey. He was just there to look like an old sea captain who was welcoming the team to town. They came into town. They were a Flyers farm team, and so they had some money to spend, and they came into town on the Santa Maria. They all got somewhere downriver, and they got onto this enormous boat, and they came coasting into town on the Santa Maria. There were a lot of people there to greet them. There was the Biddeford High School band played a song that had been written for them. It was kind of a grand opening for a hockey team to arrive into Portland, Maine, but they came in by boat. And Terry Crisp was there, and several other people that were involved with the Flyers, Bernie Perrant, and they all rode in on the boat, and then they came ashore and they were welcomed there officially, and it was all a bit of showbiz to get them started there, and they wound up winning the championship the first 2 years. So it was a good way to start. Ed Snyder wanted to make sure that if they were going to be a minor league team of the Flyers, that they were going to win. And so after they started 4-8-3, all of a sudden 4 players came in, including Terry Murray on defense and Blake Dunlop at center, that solidified their excellence, and they won the regular season and the playoffs 2 straight years. Yeah, they were going to be winners because Ed Snyder wanted it that way.
Do you remember, Doc, where you were when you got the call to say you're going in the National Hockey League?
Yes, and I turned it down the first year. That wasn't terribly smart, was it? Yes, I got a call from a man named Pete Silverman, who I know to this day. He was the producer for the Flyers telecasts in Philadelphia. Said he would like you to come to Philadelphia to do about 30 cable home games and help out in the production of some of the road telecasts. And I thought, gee, the Mariners have won 2 straight championships, and we look like we're pretty good to go for a third one here. And I get to do all the games, and my wife and I have a house we just bought, and we're pretty well settled here. Why would I want to pull up stakes and go to Philadelphia to do 30 games? And so I politely said no. And so they were accepting of that. And then at the end of the next season, we got beat out in the conference finals by the New Brunswick Hawks, who on their roster had Ron Wilson, Bruce Boudreau, Darryl Sutter, and a whole bunch of other guys that weren't going to be future NHL coaches. And so the tenor of things was a little different, and it looked like we weren't going to be bankrolled as heavily as we were the first 2 years. And they asked again, and Ed Anderson, who gave me the nickname Doc, came in and said, Doc, they aren't going to ask a third time. This time, you should say yes. And so I did. Joyce and I talked about it, and it seemed like the right time for me to make the move to Philadelphia. So we went. And there was a lot to learn about traffic and interest rates. We stole an interest rate of 14.5%. The going rate was 16, and a guy named Ed Parvin got us a rate of 14.5%. And we thought that we had actually robbed a bank to get that rate because it was a low rate at that time. So we moved there, and we stayed there in that area for 10 years.
And after that, Doc, you had to bounce back. You went to the New Jersey Devils. How did you find a way to bounce back as quickly, as successfully, and as passionately as you did?
Well, yes, there were a couple of changes in there, and one was when I wasn't renewed by the Flyers in 1993. And very quickly, I was lucky enough that Sports Channel New York needed somebody to do Devils games. And between themselves and Lou Lamoriello in New Jersey, they decided I would be the guy. And that went on for another 18 years. I was very lucky to land in New Jersey at the same time, and this is just flat out luck, that Jacques Lemaire was hired as coach, Larry Robinson was hired as his assistant, and they brought in a young goalie from Utica named Marty Brodeur. And they won the first 7 games out of the blocks. I had just come from Philadelphia where they missed the playoffs 4 out of 5 years. So I had to get used to a lot of winning, and they got to the conference final and lost in double overtime in Game 7 to the New York Rangers, the eventual champions. And the next year, they won the whole thing, sweeping Detroit in the Stanley Cup final. I was getting lots of chances to do work for Fox, and then eventually, when the rights for NHL games expired from Fox, I got to do work as one of the announcers on ABC, and then eventually with NBC working with you. So a lot of those things came to me because I was around New York. I got a chance to be seen around New York where the decision makers are. So that was all a part of the luck that was brought to me when Sports Channel New York and Lou Lamoriello brought me into New Jersey. I didn't work for the team, but the team had a say in whether I would be there or not.
It's interesting that you said Lou Lamoriello's name twice. He's a good friend of yours. He's a very good friend of mine. And I know how I call him Coach Lamoriello works. I'm curious as to your relationship with Coach and what you learned from Lou Lamoriello over all your times, because I know how much respect he has for you.
Well, yeah, and it's mutual. I didn't have some people have a great adjustment in working in someone who believes in discipline. But my dad was a high school principal. My mom was a guidance counselor. If I didn't learn discipline from them, I was in difficult shape. So it was not much of an adjustment to come to work in a place that believed in discipline at all. Lou always had this analogy that a hockey organization was like an orchestra, and everyone is important in an orchestra, whether it turns out to be the lead trumpet player or someone who plays percussion and may ring a triangle once in a while. And so that was his analogy that he gave everyone, including the interns. He would always tell them that story when they came to him the first day. And he was always great to work with for me because he was just that way. He was always understanding. He always realized that you had a difficult job to do. And I think that was part of the reason that we got along so well. He always, whenever there was an award or something that I got, he always made sure, or had his people make sure, that there was acknowledgement on the message board about it. And that didn't always happen where I had been before. But with the Devils, it happened every time. And I know that was Lou.
You'll never talk about it, so I'll brag for you. Doc Emrick won 8 Emmy Awards, 7 in a row, which is unbelievable. And I had the privilege of being his partner along with Eddie Olchuk and John Davidson, by the way, for all of those. And Doc, you are the gold standard for what hockey broadcasters need to be. I'm glad that Lou Lamoriello acknowledged you. I would just like to know, I know it was like I was nominated for 3 and won 1. I know what it's like to go into that room as a hockey person. How did you feel when you went into the Emmy Awards as a hockey person, waiting to see if your name was going to be called?
Well, it's always sort of unsettling, isn't it? Because it's a long wait. And the evening is long, and to me it is. And I'm just a small town guy from Indiana who spends a lot of time in rural Michigan, and to be in the city is exciting. But as that noted columnist Red Fisher once said, New York is thrilling, but it wears you down. And 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 I found that as the evening went on, you got worn down, and your category was earlier in the evening than mine. So you got to spend time in the hallway, and you got to not only make phone calls and tell people that you had won, but you got to go to the bathroom. And I'm sitting in there for 3.5 hours going through all the categories, and mine is almost last. And sometimes I didn't win, and sometimes I did. But as soon as it was over, we were, as you recall, we were in the front 2 rows on the right.
Mm.
And there was an exit door there, and the restroom was right outside. And I considered that great position after 3.5 hours. But I'm a lot older than you are.
Well, one thing, yeah, but I want to say this because most people don't know, and it's really important because I think you'll do a great public service for everybody. One thing everybody needs to know, I had prostate cancer 8 years ago. Doc had it a lot longer. I think 1991, Doc, you were diagnosed. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was at a time when you spent a lot of time in the hospital. I was in the hospital 16 days.
Yeah, no, I remember. And I just want to share this with everybody. When I got diagnosed, the first person that called me was Doc Emrick. And he told me about what his trials and tribulations had been and not to go through it like he had gone through it. And I just want to know, when you got that call, I know what I went through. How did you react to that, Doc? How did you
Well,
find the strength to get through it?
well, it was I was on the road in Montreal when I received a call from the Hershey Medical Center, and the guy that called me was really very stoic whenever he saw me in the office. And he called that day and he said, "Michael, how are you?" And I'm thinking, "Oh shoot. If he's trying to have a bedside manner at this point, the news is not going to be good." And it wasn't. And so he went over a few things that I would need to do and need to know. And as soon as the call was over, I said a prayer, God, get me through this. And then I was on the road with Bill Clement, and I went down to his room and I said, well, here's what just happened. And of course I was in Montreal, and I had a game the next night, Flyers in Montreal. And so he said, let's get Jay Snyder on the phone, which we did. Now, Joyce didn't know this yet because you don't phone this in. And so the game was Saturday night. So the next afternoon, we sat down on the couch and I explained to her what it was, that I had been assured by the people in Philadelphia, the doctors in Philadelphia who I'd talked to, that it was slow moving and that it wasn't one of those cancers that could not be cured. And so anyway, we went about it with our chins up, and the next day we went to Hahnemann Hospital, and then the day or two after that we went to Johns Hopkins, and I saw someone there, and he said, this was October, and he said, how about I do you after I get back from a skiing trip in January? And I'm thinking, I want this out now. He said, don't worry, it's slow moving. I'll take care of it. It's slow moving. You got plenty of time. And as it turned out, I did. So we're on the gurney headed down to surgery. And he said, I know you're the Flyers announcer. I just want you to know I'm a Ranger fan, but I'm going to take care of you anyway. And he did. And
Oh, did he ever? Did he ever?
yeah, he's a friend of
yeah,
this day. But
I'll
that was
always,
back in the day before robotics. So this was one of those things where they were done by hand back then, and he was very skilled. And All went well, but as I said, it was a long hospital stay. And how long were you in the hospital?
2 days.
2 days.
Yeah.
See, and there are people that tell me it's practically outpatient now. So that's the great progress that we are lucky we live at the time that we do because of medical science. We are
Yeah.
very lucky.
Well, I was really lucky to have you as a friend, along with Sam Flood, who had also gone through it. And I think the biggest message I want to get out there is positive energy helps, friendship helps, and people that have gone through it before, that you listen to them and respect their opinions, because it does make a difference. And you clearly make it a difference for me. So I'm grateful for that, Doc. Another cool moment in our career, I don't know if you'll remember it as well as I did, was when we got off the plane in Sochi. And and we were headed to a brand new hotel. No, I know when I checked into my room, there was still plastic on all the furniture, which I had to take off. And I remember you and I went for, I don't know if you remember, but you and I went for a walk near the Black Sea. And it's such a good story about you. There were all those dogs that were being shot by the, and I just saw it in your face. It was painful for you to watch that. And I learned something about the way you reacted to that. How did you feel, Doc, when you were watching all that happen before the Olympics even started?
Well, fortunately, I didn't actually see one of them shot, but I saw the result of it, and I to this day admire David Backus for what he did. He was one of the American players. He and his wife were over there. He had a great feeling about the same thing I did, but he had a way of dealing with it. He had an apartment with the American team that was on ground level, and he basically kidnapped two of the dogs before they were going to be assassinated,
Hmm.
and he got them into his apartment and locked the door and gave them and showered them and arranged with a local veterinarian through a lot of red tape to get them vaccinated. And then he, of course, got them food right away and got them flown back. They allowed them to come back on the team plane
Hmm.
back to the United States, and he found homes for both of them. Now, it was a lot of trouble to go to, but he at least saved two. And that was marvelous, and to this day, I admire him for it. I wish that more could have been saved, but the Russians considered the stray dogs as an eyesore. And rather than round them up and take them out somewhere or put them in holding places and kennels somewhere and give them something to eat, the easiest way to deal with it was just to kill them all. And that was hard. That was
Yeah.
very hard, but it took place. They wanted to get them out of the way before people started to arrive for the Olympics. Unfortunately, Pierre, you and I arrived before they were all taken care of. Some of our crew would go to the commissary and they would have their own food to eat, and after they were done, they would take extra out to the fence where some of the dogs that had survived the assassinations, some of the dogs that had survived would come up near the fence and they would give them food through the fence. But it was the real downside of Sochi. It was my last Olympics, and it was the most painful one of all for that reason. It was 9 time zones away, and I found difficulty adjusting to the time zones and difficulty sleeping, but the hockey was really good. It was excellent. And I will never forget in the women's gold medal game, the U.S. was leading late in the game, and Kevin Dineen
Hmm.
called a timeout. And I don't know what he said, but during that timeout, things changed. And Canada came back, and Marie-Philippe Poulin scored to tie the game and then won it in overtime. And I give Kevin Dineen a lot of credit, even though coaches don't get gold medals. I think he had an awful lot to do with Canada winning that one. And that was probably my standout memory of that, along with what you watched with me, TJ Oshie, scoring all of those goals, 4 out of 6 in the shootout between the U.S. and Russia. That was a memory that I won't lose. I may lose my memory someday, but I won't forget T.J. Oshie, and I know you won't either as you went off to interview him.
No, I will never forget TJ Oshie. I'll never forget your calls of all of his goals. We had so many good Olympic moments. You, Eddie, and I spent a lot of Olympics together. One of the things that I loved was our visit to Torino, where we would take the bus together and I would bring you a coffee. And usually you like to drink your coffee black, but I would get you one of those Italian lattes. And to this day, you never told me if you liked it or not. Did you like the lattes or did you prefer it black, Doc?
No, it was good because you brought it, and if it was free, it was for me. And it was always nice of you to do. I had another one of my hernia surgeries right before the Olympics, and I was prohibited from carrying anything over 2 pounds. And my airport pilot's case was well over 2 pounds, and so Pierre would carry it along with the coffee for me as we got on the shuttle bus over to the rink each day. And I never forgot that because otherwise I would not have been able to carry that with me. And it had all of my gear in it, all of my heavy notebooks that carried things that I felt that I needed, probably didn't, but it was my security blanket, all of those notebooks that I had.
One of the other great Olympic memories I had was you and I on an off day during the London Summer Olympics going to downtown London and doing some great historical searches, let's say. And Doc, you blew me away with your intimate knowledge of everything British history. Where did that come from?
Oh, I used to watch. I used to watch a lot of PBS, and they had the Six Wives of Henry VIII, and he had an awful way of dealing with discomfort, and so we went to the Tower of London, and we went down to see the rack and all of those other awful things that they used to use. But we also got to see, some of the more pleasant things in the Tower of London, and it was a good time. The one thing about the Olympics that I don't know that people are aware of is that you're there 17 days, but you work all but one. And so you make the best of that one day. It's right before the gold medal game, and then the rest of the time you've got games almost every day. And the same is true when you're working hockey. You have events every day, and on the off day, which is right before the bronze and the gold medal game, you have a day off. And so you plan and make the best of it you can. And that was the day that we went downtown in London, and we got to go to the Tower of London and hear a lecture or two. And it was interesting to me. I'm not sure if I shared this with you. I asked, when there was an awful lot of bombing and destruction during World War II, I asked the tour guide after we were done at the tower why there was no damage to the tower during the bombing. And he said it was because Hitler had wanted to save the Tower of London for himself if the Germans had won the war, which they did not, but he ordered that the Tower of London not be bombed because that was where he wanted to have his headquarters if they had won. You always learn something every day, and that was what I carried away as learning from that day.
When I coached against Al Arbor, he used to send his equipment man down to my office and he'd say to the equipment man, say, the coach wants to see you. So I'd go down to his office a couple hours before the game and we'd have coffee and we'd talk about everything but hockey. How's your family? How things going? Everything else. And one of the things he said to me on one of the meetings we had was prior preparation prevents potential problems. When I first started working with you, nothing could have been more truthful than his advice to me. I watched you prepare day in and day out. Prior preparation prevents potential problems. Your work habits were impeccable, Doc, and your information was off the charts. When did you start figuring out that that was an important part of the process for you as a broadcaster?
Well, Pierre, it's good of you to ask. We used to share a desk, a big table before the games that we had for NBC. And, it was good because the notes were there and we could, spend time going over the stuff that we needed for that night at the same location because there was room. It was one of those tables that you see at youth hockey games, one of those things where they sell 50-50 tickets. It's a big table. And so we had that to work with. And over my time in the minors, my 7 years in the minors, there were always things that I felt I needed during a game and I didn't have. And so the next time I realized that's what I need, and so I would prepare that and have it at my side when I went into the broadcast booth the next time. Well, over a period of time, you get a whole bunch of things like that, and so you're preparing an awful lot, and you have that on the back of your scorecard, the number of, if you get into a shootout, how many times has each potential shooter faced that particular goaltender? Mm-hmm. Well, that takes a lot of writing out and a lot of research, but it sure is helpful to the fans if you have that, because sometimes a guy has faced a goaltender 8 times and he's never scored on him. Okay, if it's never happened in 8 times, that's worth mentioning. If it's 3 out of 5, well, who cares? But if it's 0 for 8, that's worth mentioning. So if you don't have it, you can't use it. So that means you have to spend some time doing it. And a lot of times those things that are stats could be done the night before. But other things that are a part of the game notes couldn't be done until the afternoon of the game. So that's the reason that we had the big table to work from, Pierre. And it helped an awful lot that I had the afternoon to do it because I wasn't obligated in any way to do other things. And so I could just sit there and enjoy preparing for the game. It was fun to do. And Eddie would come along later and we would, compare notes up in the booth before we started. But I think also the one game that was the most memorable telecast was one that you didn't do, but you did do. And that was the gold medal game in Vancouver. And the story behind your not doing it, but doing it was it, of course, wound up being Zach Parise tied the game with only a few seconds left. It went to overtime. Sidney Crosby scored the winner on Ryan Miller. So the game is over, and you're working for the Canadian broadcaster, but you did interviews with both Miller and Crosby. And we had the rights on NBC with no color commentator other than Eddie. I mean, we didn't have anybody down at the benches. You were it. And so we had the right to play those interviews back. And it was the best day, in my mind, for the sport to be seen in the U.S. for a number of reasons. Number one, the outcome was in doubt. And the goalie was pulled, and the U.S. tied the game, and it went to overtime. Now, because there are a lot of people that are gathered around wanting to watch the closing ceremony later that day, there are a lot of people around their TVs that day, or there are other people that are texting and saying, hey, the game between the U.S. and Canada is going to overtime. So there are more people watching. We had more people watching that game than had watched a hockey game of any kind in decades
Mhm.
because of that. So the game is over. Sid scores the winning goal. And we play the two interviews that you did with those two participants back. And they both spoke so well that it was good for the U.S. audience to not only have seen that game, to have seen the outcome, and they're staying on because of the closing ceremony eventually, and they get to see well-spoken athletes talk about the game they have just played, thanks to your interviews. And I have never been more proud to have been around hockey than I was that day. It wasn't necessarily because of the outcome, because, that's something you have no control over. But the thing that we did have control over was using the interviews and hearing from the people that had played the game, and that meant a lot. And I think our audience benefited from that. So that was also one of the better games that I had seen. And you were a part of it, but you weren't. So there.
It was one thing I'll always remember about Vancouver. Those Olympics were spectacular. I was working for two networks at the time, NBC and CTV in Canada. I think I did 52 games that Olympics between women's and men's hockey, working for two networks. But 2011, Doc, a year later, you and I and Eddie are doing Game 7, Vancouver, Boston. It is a tremendous series. The Bruins win because of the Merlot line with Danny Paille and with Gregory Campbell and with Sean Thornton. And what I remember, as soon as the game was over, you and I get in a car and we're going to the airport. Do you remember the fire bombs coming off the bridges when we were heading to the airport?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily expect that, but I think you did. There, the mayor, I believe it was the mayor of Vancouver, had uh, had banned all incoming had banned incoming traffic or incoming alcohol that day. There was some ban that was placed that day, anticipating that it was going to be a chaotic day regardless of outcome. But then when it turned out to be that outcome, I didn't realize that we were lucky to escape as early as we did.
No.
But then when we got to the airport and you had permission, you had membership in a private club that had television and allowed me to come in with you. We were seeing TV coverage of what was going on downtown,
Unbelievable.
and it was remarkable what all had happened. And I was hoping that no one would die because of it, because it was really frightening. Vancouver had that happen in some other playoffs where there had been, I believe, the one with the Rangers in '94. There had been
Mm-hmm.
some burning of cars and things like that. I thought Michigan State had a corner on that, but all they do is throw couches out and into the street and set them on fire. Uh, there might be some of that in the near future. It's hard to know, but
Doc, before we let you go, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your beloved Pittsburgh Pirates, your passion for baseball, the relationships you've built over time with a lot of the Pirates people. Where did that come from? How did it manifest itself? And are you still just addicted to the great game of baseball?
yeah, I like baseball a lot. I'm older and slower, and so maybe it's just the right pace for me. But the Pirates, of course, are a low budget team in a sport where high budget normally wins. Once in a while, you have a team like Kansas City a few years ago that might win with not spending $200 million, but usually it means that. And so you realize that we are going to develop players for other teams, but we do have Paul Skeens, who is just a thrilling pitcher to watch. We might have we might have some other players that will rise to the occasion, but you realize going in that your hopes can be high because it is in fact February, but the hopes can often be dashed by May just because the other teams are much more competitive. But that said, it is baseball. The uniforms are nice. The guys in them are very friendly people. But oftentimes, by the time you get to the end of May, the other teams have passed them. It would be nice if the owner would put $150 million into the team instead of 80 some. But that's not going to happen, and you recognize that it's not. And so as a result, you realize at age 79, you have seen the team win 3 world championships. You just feel sorry for the people that are younger than you that have not seen them win anything.
The finest form of flattery is imitation, and everybody imitates your great call from the Winter Classic in Buffalo. Crosby with the game on his stick. Where did that come from? Did it just come out of the blue for you? Because everybody utilizes the Emrick game on his stick.
Well, yeah, it happened earlier that season, and it was Crosby again, and both times that I used it, and those were the only 2 times he scored. It was a game. It was the Darian Hatcher dentist game in Philadelphia.
We did it.
Yeah, that's right. When he removed some of Sid's teeth, and then later in the game in overtime, Sid got a breakaway pass and went in and scored, and that was the game on his stick. And then it happened later on in Sid's career outdoors in Buffalo, and it was one of those things that you get lucky on, and it just comes out of nowhere, and so there it was, and so those were the only 2 times that I ever used it, and both times were with Crosby, and both times he scored, and so I retired with 2 for 2, and you're right, flattery is wonderful, and we all borrow from one another, and so anyone that borrows that, why, good for them, and I'm happy that they feel like borrowing it because that means a lot.
Did you have a favorite player that you liked to deal with in the NHL when you were doing it?
I liked Sid a lot because he was humble and skilled and took care of himself. To this day, he is the best player on the team and one of the best players in the league. And I always liked him, and I liked Nick Lidstrom for the very same reason. I had an interview that I did with Nick. It came out of I was doing a Devils game in Detroit, and they said, we need to do an interview with a Red Wing and tape it before the game. Do you have a preference? I said, why don't we do Nick Lidstrom? And so it was just shortly after Hockey News had come out with the players voting on various categories, and they had named Nick the most respected. And so anyway, we're in the midst of the interview, and I said, so the Hockey News players poll has said you are the most respected. Now, I got in the middle of the question, and then I thought, well, how am I going to ask him a question without him feeling like he's going to come off a braggart? So I said, so, Nick, you are named the most respected, and I don't know how to ask you this, so did you have good parents, Nick? And he laughed like you did, and he said, yes, I had very good parents, and they encouraged me all the way along through my career, including when I lived alone in the basement of a house at age 16, And I later learned that he had a job similar to what people that that work on power trucks that reinstate power after blizzards. I mean, that was the job that he had when he was 16 years old. He trained in that, while he was playing hockey, while he's playing professional hockey. And I didn't realize that that was the job that he had, but he moved away and lived alone in the basement of this house with a couple of older, an older Swedish couple.
Wow.
And so you had to grow up fast. And I think there was probably a military obligation in with all of that too.
Mhm.
But I always admired Nick. He was such a wonderful human being. And my wife and I had season tickets to the Red Wings for a number of years. And we didn't, we don't have them now, but we did for a number of years while I was working. And we would give them, we never sat in them, but we'd give them to people around where we lived because they would enjoy going down and seeing the team. It was about 50 miles away from here. And so then Nick retired after 20 years. And we got home once, and there was a voicemail on our answering machine, which we had back then, and it was Nick. And it was a recording that he had sent to every season ticket holder
Wow.
after he retired, thanking them for their support of him and Annika and the family for all the time that they spent in Detroit.
Wow.
Now, who does that?
No.
Nobody except Nick.
Yeah.
What a grand gesture that was. Even to think of recording a message that could be sent to every season ticket holder, but that's what he was like. So anyway, there are two of my favorites for the same reason. Not only were they or are they wonderful players, but they're also great people.
I can't thank you enough for this grand gesture. You just jumped right on, Doc, when I asked you to. So grateful. Everybody at One Team Media is so grateful. So much information that people can learn from just listening to you. And I could keep doing this for hours. I was spoiled throughout 16 years because I had a chance to do it for hours with you. So grateful and proud to call you a partner. Thank you so much for your time, Doc. Just
I
fantastic.
you know I hate to ruin the exit, but I have one of my favorite stories I'd like to share with you that I don't
Sure.
think you know. That Nate Greenberg,
Well, I know Nate very well.
yeah, of course, he told me this story, and I know I don't know if you know it, but I know you'd like it, and perhaps your viewers would. So anyway, the Bruins are sold out at the old Boston Garden. They don't have any seats to sell, and somebody thinks of the organ bench because it's wide enough for two people to sit on. The organist doesn't use it during the game, only during the intermissions. So they decide to sell the organ bench as two season tickets. And the deal is that when the PA announcer says this is the final minute of the period, you have to get up off the organ bench and let the organist sit down. But for the 19 minutes of the period, that organ bench seat is yours. And if you recall, Pierre, the organ is located in the corner of the lower bowl. It's an absolutely fabulous seat. And Nate told me this story at lunch probably 10 years ago. And it goes back, I don't know how long ago, but for many years they sold the organ bench as two season tickets. Now I ruined your closing, but I thank you so much for inviting me on, and I hope that you and your audience enjoyed the story Nate told me about the Bruins and how they came up with two more season tickets.
You never ruin anything. There's a reason why we were told in the last 5 minutes of every game, it's Doc time. Button up and let him take the game. There's Exhibit A. Doc, I cannot thank you enough. Please give our best to Joyce. You have been unbelievable. This has been so enlightening and so refreshing and so educational, so typical of Doc Emrick. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, both of you, both Ryan and you and everybody on the call.
Thanks a lot, Doc. I appreciate it. That's another edition of Inside the Game. Next week, the Pittsburgh Penguin legend, the great Kevin Stevens. Thanks for watching.